Behind closed palace doors, away from the endless glare of photographers and the ever-listening ears of palace aides, a meeting unfolded that few knew was even possible, let alone happening. It wasn't scheduled. It wasn't announced. Not a whisper made it to the royal press office. And yet, there it was, confirmed by top insiders and now sending shockwaves through every corridor of Kensington Palace. Princess Anne, the indomitable force of tradition and backbone of the monarchy, had quietly summoned Princess Catherine, the woman many have called the next Diana, for a meeting of utmost secrecy. What happened inside that room would not only send Queen Camilla into a frenzy but might very well alter the monarchy's path forever. No aides were present. Not even Catherine's most trusted protection officers accompanied her past the final corridor. For a moment, the palace fell into a silence it hadn't known in decades. Camilla wasn't told. William was reportedly informed only after Catherine had already left. And Charles? No word. The very fact that this meeting occurred without the knowledge or approval of the reigning queen consort was the first red flag that something far deeper was unfolding beneath the gilded surface of royal protocol. The royal rota, the press corps that lives and breathes for every movement of the family, was inexplicably blind to the encounter. Their silence didn't come from incompetence. It came from being shut out entirely. Kensington Palace had executed an unprecedented lockdown of information. Phones of senior staff were reportedly confiscated for hours. Schedules were wiped clean from digital records. Something was being orchestrated. Something major. Outside the gates, the tabloids speculated wildly. Was it health-related? Was the king deteriorating faster than publicly admitted? Or was it a private conversation about succession, something too volatile to handle with an audience? Rumors buzzed. Whispers grew louder. And all eyes turned to Catherine, especially when a single blurry photo surfaced that stopped everyone cold. She had arrived hours before the scheduled royal appearance in a black ensemble that sent social media into a frenzy. Black, formerly a color of mourning in the monarchy, wasn't chosen by accident. It was a statement. A signal. A quiet symbol of something either dying or about to be reborn. Anne, the first to arrive, had reportedly been waiting. Not with frustration but anticipation. Insiders revealed she had been unusually quiet for days leading up to this moment. Her calendar had been mysteriously cleared, despite key public appearances scheduled weeks in advance. Some staff members were instructed not to enter the West Wing at all that morning. And when Catherine entered, witnesses claimed she carried a sealed folder. Slim, red, stamped with a royal insignia. No one saw its contents. No one knew its origin. But those who've served the monarchy long enough understood exactly what such a folder meant. It carried consequences. This wasn't two women catching up over tea. This wasn't familial warmth. This was precision, intention, purpose. Anne and Catherine hadn't met in secret to grieve or gossip. They had come together with something far more dangerous. A plan. One rooted in legacy, sealed in trust, and threatening to unravel the very image Camilla had spent years trying to build. But this wasn't just a chat between in-laws. This was the beginning of a bold maneuver that would shake Queen Camilla to her core. Anne didn't come to vent. She didn't come for sisterly warmth or idle support. She came with purpose, quiet, forceful, and unflinching. As Catherine took her seat, unaware of the full weight of what she was walking into, Anne slid a folder across the polished table with a movement that was calm on the surface but loaded with historical gravity. The seal was unmistakable. Not one of the Crown's typical bureaucratic dispatches, this one bore the mark of Queen Elizabeth's private estate. A royal dossier, long kept hidden, untouched by Charles, Camilla, or even the so-called inner circle of palace strategists. This wasn't just paperwork. It was the Queen's true voice, long after her passing. Sources close to Anne claim this document had remained sealed until just weeks prior. It wasn't stored in the palace's traditional archives, but buried within Windsor's private vaults, accessible only to those the Queen had personally trusted. And Anne, the only daughter of the monarch, was one of the last to still carry that silent confidence. What lay inside wasn't just a look back at history, it was a revision, a re-evaluation, a line drawn between what was tradition and what should have been. Inside were personal memos, annotations, even marginal notes from Queen Elizabeth herself. They painted a stark picture of her true intentions for the future of the monarchy, intentions that had been conveniently overlooked once Camilla stepped into her final role. Among the pages, Catherine allegedly found references to her name, not just as a consort to the heir, but as the public face of a modern monarchy. A woman of poise, composure, and most importantly, acceptance. Elizabeth had noted the shift in public loyalty years before her passing. The people adored Catherine not because she was royal, but because she seemed untouched by it, graceful, relatable, real. And yet, that quiet preference had been erased in the grand rush to crown Camilla. That was the injustice Anne had carried, silently, for years. There had always been tension in Anne's gaze when Camilla entered a room, not from pettiness, but principle. Anne had never forgotten the scandals, the chaos, the whispered apologies behind closed doors. Camilla's ascension wasn't earned, it was permitted. And to Anne, that permission came at a steep cost to her mother's carefully guarded legacy. For all her stoicism, Anne had never truly accepted the rewriting of history. That fire, smoldering for years, had now found its moment to burn through the facade. What made it even harder for Anne was the emotional contradiction. She loved her brother. She respected his journey. But in Camilla, she saw a symbol of the past the monarchy should have buried, not crowned. And in Catherine, she saw the future her mother had quietly envisioned. That internal war between loyalty to blood and loyalty to truth was what drove Anne to make the vow she never spoke aloud, not even to her children. On the day of Queen Elizabeth's funeral, as cameras captured every tear and bowed head, Anne made her own private promise at the foot of her mother's coffin, to protect the crown not just from enemies but from itself. This wasn't merely about power, it was about legacy, succession, and redemption. Anne had waited for the right moment, the right partner, and the right conditions. Now, with Catherine sitting across from her steady, shaken, and processing the enormity of what lay before her, the torch was being passed. Quietly, deliberately, but unmistakably. And while Anne revealed her shocking plan, Catherine's reaction would ignite a firestorm of consequences neither woman could contain. Catherine, long admired for her calm composure and dignified silence, finally reached the edge of her restraint. For years, she had walked the tightrope between royal duty and personal truth, wearing the crown's expectations like a second skin, always polished, always perfect. But in that quiet moment with Princess Anne, the weight she had carried for so long became too heavy to hide. Her voice, steady at first, began to tremble as the emotions surged. Then the tears came quiet, unrelenting, and raw. She wasn't crying for sympathy. She was crying because the truth had been buried for far too long. And now, in the presence of the only royal who truly understood the burden, Catherine let it all out. She confessed that since Camilla's crowning, she had felt like a mere figurehead, an ornament for public appearances, a symbol to be displayed rather than a voice to be heard. While Camilla wielded influence behind palace doors, Catherine had been expected to smile, wave, and nod her head. Every move scrutinized, every opinion is discouraged. Her role had become ceremonial, stripped of purpose, stripped of substance, and worse, her proximity to power made her a silent witness to decisions she had no power to stop. It wasn't that she wanted the throne. It was that she had watched it turn into something her late mother-in-law, Princess Diana, would never have recognized, and that above everything else shattered her. With her voice thick with emotion, Catherine revealed the fears she had never spoken aloud. Not even to William. Not even to her own family. What would become of Princess Charlotte? Was she being groomed for a future built on shadows and compromise? Would her daughter inherit not the dignity of Diana, but the politicking of a crown that had traded authenticity for image? Catherine's nightmare wasn't about losing a title. It was about losing the soul of the monarchy, losing the promise that one day, things would be better for the next generation of women in the royal family. She spoke of the pressure, the relentless push to maintain appearances. "I've been told to smile when I want to scream," she admitted. "Told to keep quiet, even when I saw injustice. They say it's for the good of the institution. But what about the people inside it? What about me?" Her words weren't just a confession. They were a reckoning. And for the first time in a long time, Catherine wasn't a duchess, a princess, or a symbol. She was a mother, a daughter-in-law, a woman who had finally reached her breaking point. Anne listened without interruption. There was no judgment, no shock, just a long pause, followed by a single sentence that changed everything. "You're not alone anymore. It's time." In that moment, Something unspoken passed between them, a shared vow, a sisterhood of resistance that had been sealed with tears rather than signatures. The crown had underestimated Catherine. It had treated her as quiet, as compliant. But what it failed to see was that beneath that silence was a storm gathering strength. But as their emotional exchange ended, Camilla was already mobilizing, blindsided, yes, but not defeated. The queen consort wasn't just excluded, she was betrayed. And when word of the private meeting reached Camilla through her daughter Laura, it wasn't disbelief that flooded in. It was rage. Laura's voice, reportedly trembling as she recounted what had leaked from within palace walls, barely finished her sentence before Camilla cut the call short. She already understood what had happened. Anne and Catherine had met intentionally, intimately, and strategically, and she hadn't been invited. The message couldn't have been clearer. There were plans unfolding that didn't include her. For a woman who had spent decades clawing her way from scandal to the throne, this was not just a slight, it was war. On the surface, Camilla remained composed. At a public engagement that same evening, she smiled, posed, and made polite small talk. But behind the gilded palace doors, the storm was already tearing through the corridors. Staff inside Clarence's house later revealed that Camilla, in a rare moment of unfiltered fury, hurled a priceless porcelain vase against the stone fireplace. The sound, they said, echoed like a warning shot. This wasn't a tantrum, it was a declaration, and it was only the beginning. What followed was an immediate and brutal campaign of control. She summoned King Charles within the hour, demanding answers. How long had he known? Why hadn't he stopped it? And perhaps the question that cut deepest, had he chosen his sister and daughter-in-law over his own wife? Charles, caught off guard, reportedly attempted to calm her, but it was too late. Camilla wasn't looking for comfort, she was preparing for retaliation. With the veneer of royal diplomacy slipping, Camilla began orchestrating a strategic reshuffle of influence. Royal charity patronages linked to Catherine were suddenly under review. Event schedules mysteriously changed. Long-trusted aides were reassigned or dismissed under vague pretexts. The operation was swift, cold, and deliberate. Inside the palace, morale collapsed. Several aides, fiercely loyal to Catherine, broke down in tears after being given termination notices or reassigned without explanation. What they had witnessed wasn't just a power struggle, it was a purge, and at the center of it stood Camilla, unyielding, unforgiving, and increasingly volatile. But she knew this wasn't just about flexing authority behind the scenes. If she was going to regain control of the narrative, she needed to strike where it mattered most: public opinion. Thus began the planning of a bold media offensive. Camilla instructed her closest advisors to begin drafting talking points. Leaks were strategically fed to sympathetic journalists. Soon, whispers surfaced in select tabloids painting Catherine as ambitious, fragile, even manipulative. Camilla's intent was clear. She would frame herself as the misunderstood monarch, quietly holding the family together while the next generation unraveled in envy. Yet for all her maneuvering, one thing eluded her: the loyalty of the people. Because while Camilla plotted in private, the hearts of the public were already shifting, and Catherine, alongside Anne, was preparing to strike at the one place Camilla never expected: the public stage. But Catherine and Anne weren't retreating. They were about to go public in a way that no royal women ever had before. In the heart of London, as crowds gathered to pay tribute to Britain's veterans, an unexpected image captured the world's attention and changed the tone of the monarchy overnight. The crowd had expected a royal appearance, but no one could have predicted the seismic shift they were about to witness. Catherine did not arrive beside Prince William, nor did she walk behind King Charles or Queen Camilla. Instead, she walked side by side with Princess Anne, Britain's most uncompromising royal figure, in a display so powerful, so precise, that the nation held its breath. This wasn't just a public appearance, it was a statement. And what Catherine wore on her chest sent that statement echoing through every royal watching corner of the globe: Princess Diana's sapphire brooch, gleaming defiantly in the light. Placed not for decoration but for revolution. The moment the cameras caught sight of the brooch, speculation erupted into a full-blown media frenzy. That particular jewel hadn't been worn in public in years, not since the early days of Catherine's marriage, and certainly not since Camilla's rise to queen consort. Its re-emergence now, at Anne's side and not Camilla's, was no accident. It was a reminder, a warning, a revival of Diana's memory at a time when the palace appeared to be drifting far from her ideals. And to many, it was also a challenge. Catherine wasn't just standing in Diana's legacy, she was now stepping into her strength. Observers immediately noticed something unusual about the appearance. The body language between Anne and Catherine was striking. No stiff formality, no staged performance. They walked in sync, their movements deliberate, controlled, almost militant. It was as if they were reading from the same invisible script written long ago by a queen who foresaw the dangers of the wrong woman standing in the wrong place. And then, in a moment that would dominate front pages for days, Anne placed her hand gently on Catherine's back as she delivered her speech. A gesture so rare for the Princess Royal, so unexpected, it stopped commentators in their tracks. It wasn't affection, it was approved. Alliance. Endorsement. The monarchy was shifting, and it wasn't waiting for permission. But the loudest statement didn't come from jewelry, speeches, or gestures. It came in silence. The official royal Instagram account posted highlights from the event later that day. Photos of Anne, tributes to veterans, and Catherine's poised expression beneath that unmistakable sapphire brooch. But one figure was conspicuously missing. Camilla. Not a word, not a mention, not even a cropped image. For royal watchers, it was an omission too loud to ignore. Had the palace deliberately removed the queen consort from its narrative? Or had the family's media team made a quiet choice, under pressure, to take sides in the storm unfolding behind the gates? The public response was immediate. Within hours, hashtags exploded. The true queens trended worldwide. Commentators dissected every detail, from the jewelry to the seating arrangements, to the symbolic placement of flowers on the memorial wreath. This wasn't just a shift in public perception. It was a declaration of who the people saw as the heart of the modern monarchy. Not the one crowned by history, but the one chosen by sentiment. But the power play wasn't just symbolic. Behind the scenes, a historic revelation was about to drop, and it would question Camilla's very place in the royal bloodline. Buried beneath years of royal protocol, ceremonial pleasantries, and carefully curated public images lay a truth that not even the most seasoned royal observers saw coming. It wasn't a scandal hidden in photographs or whispered rumors, it was something far more chilling. A sealed letter, handwritten by Queen Elizabeth II herself, and kept in absolute secrecy from the very moment of her passing, not filed through official channels, not archived in Windsor's State Library. This was private, personal, and powerful. And according to palace insiders, it was handed directly to Princess Anne with one simple instruction: wait until the time is right. That time, it seemed, had finally arrived. As the alliance between Anne and Catherine deepened, Anne unveiled what she had kept close to her chest since the Queen's final hours, a portion of the monarch's last letter, written in her own hand. This wasn't a formal royal decree, but something far more haunting. A maternal appeal, a moral directive from a woman who had seen her family weather decades of disgrace and repair. The letter didn't speak in the language of thrones or titles. It spoke in something rarer. In it, Queen Elizabeth expressed not only admiration for Catherine's loyalty and quiet strength, but a vision. She referred to Catherine as the face of the crown's future, praising her integrity, her devotion to family, and most significantly, her ability to connect with the public on a level no other royal had since Diana. What made the letter explosive wasn't just what it said, it was what it didn't. Not once did Camilla's name appear in the passages Anne revealed. Not a single line acknowledging her as a rightful queen. No words of congratulations, no expression of trust. The silence was deafening. In the void where her name should have been, questions flourished. Did Elizabeth truly believe Camilla should reign as queen consort? Or had she simply been overruled by time, pressure, and the powerful machinery of the crown's advisors? Anne's decision to finally share the letter with Catherine wasn't driven by revenge, it was driven by duty. She had waited, as instructed. But now, with the monarchy at a crossroads, silence was no longer an option. Almost immediately, whispers began to circulate inside the palace. A handful of trusted staff, longtime loyalists to the late queen, confirmed that such a document did exist. Some claimed they had seen Elizabeth drafting it in her final months, alone, away from official oversight. Legal minds were brought in quietly to assess whether personal wishes like these unofficial yet deeply symbolic could challenge the formal structure of succession. Could the dying words of a monarch hold power against the tidal force of protocol? The debate ignited behind the scenes. While lawyers and advisors treaded cautiously, one fact was impossible to deny: the letter existed, and the timing of its exposure was devastating. Camilla's reaction was swift. She demanded the letter be discredited immediately. Legal representatives were deployed to issue warnings against publication. Press access to certain royal insiders was suddenly revoked. But it was too late. Too many had read it. Too many had whispered its contents. The secret was no longer contained. And for the first time since her coronation, Camilla's legitimacy was publicly under question. The silence of the Queen's letter became a scream that echoed through Parliament, the press, and the people. Now the nation was watching, divided, electrified, and ready for answers. And in that chaos, King Charles would be forced to choose. For a man who waited 70 years to wear the crown, the moment of truth had arrived. King Charles, long seen as the patient heir, the eternal apprentice to the throne, now found himself faced with the one choice he had never rehearsed, one not dictated by duty or protocol, but by blood and betrayal. When the message from Anne came, it was clear: come to Sandringham, alone, without Camilla. And this time, not as king but as brother, son, and keeper of a crumbling promise. He arrived quietly, but the silence between him and Anne didn't last long. The room didn't echo with royal formality, it rang with raw urgency. Anne didn't mince words. She laid the Queen's final letter on the table, its contents already known to Charles, but now exposed with consequences he could no longer ignore. Her voice didn't shake, her eyes didn't blink. She demanded that he honor their mother's wishes not just as a monarch, but as her firstborn son. The Queen, she reminded him, had trusted him with the crown but had trusted her with the truth. And now, that truth stood in opposition to the woman he had sacrificed so much for. Camilla. Charles listened. At first defensive, then quieter, then finally weary. As Anne spoke, the weight of a lifetime of compromise came crashing down on him. Flashbacks of his final conversation with Elizabeth haunted the edges of his mind. She had spoken slowly, her voice frail but pointed. "Preserve the legacy, Charles. Preserve the people's trust. Let the past rest, and let the future rise." He nodded. He had said he understood. But now, in the harsh light of confrontation, he realized he had broken that promise the moment Camilla was crowned beside him. He loved Camilla. That was never in question. But he also knew that love alone had not secured his reign. It was the loyalty of the people, the trust of Parliament, and the silent contract between the monarch and the nation that had elevated him. And now, that contract was under siege. His reign was no longer stable, it was teetering. The letter, the whispers, the shifting loyalty within the palace itself, all of it pointed to one painful reality. His monarchy was slipping, and he could no longer ignore it. William, caught in the storm's eye, attempted to bridge the divide. He pleaded for calm, for time, for unity, but he too was visibly unraveling. Caught between loyalty to his father and his wife, between the throne he was born to inherit and the truth he now had to carry, William stood helpless. He was not ready to rule, but he was ready to protect. And that protection was slowly shifting toward Catherine, whether Charles realized it or not. Charles said little by the end of the meeting. No decisions, no decrees. Only a heavy breath, a downcast glance, and a sentence that left everyone uneasy. "This is bigger than me now." Palace aides who saw him later described him as older than they'd ever seen him, defeated, uncertain. The king, it seemed, had finally been reduced to a man trapped between the legacy of a mother, the love of a wife, and the burden of a nation in revolt. And as the crown quivered, Camilla prepared her final move, a televised interview that would either save her legacy or destroy it. She sat beneath the bright lights, the world watching, a trembling queen with everything to lose. For Camilla, this wasn't a performance, it was survival. Every advisor had warned her against it. The palace communications team begged her to reconsider. But Camilla was done letting others speak for her. This was her last chance to rewrite the story, to salvage her legacy before it slipped completely out of her hands. And so, for the first time since her coronation, she agreed to a solo interview with no king by her side. No protective royal shield, just her and the nation she believed had misunderstood her from the very beginning. It was the BBC who secured the exclusive. A bold, carefully orchestrated hour designed to show the human side of a woman long painted as the villain. Camilla, dressed simply, spoke softly, with a noticeable strain in her voice. From the start, she denied any role in the palace's internal plotting. She insisted she had no knowledge of staff reassignments, no hand in the whispers that aimed to discredit Catherine, no influence in how the Queen's final letter was buried. "I have been blamed for everything, even things I didn't know had happened," she said, visibly holding back emotion. "I was never part of the game. I was always just trying to exist inside it." And then, the interview took an emotional turn. Camilla's voice cracked as she spoke of Diana not in the context of rivalry, but as a shadow that had never left her. "People think I walked into this life and took something that wasn't mine. But the truth is, I never wanted to be queen. I never chased the crown. I just wanted peace. And somehow, I ended up the target of 1,000 arrows." The tears, whether genuine or calculated, flowed as she described the years of ridicule, the headlines, the hate mail, the Photoshop tabloids that had followed her from the moment Diana died to the day she stood beside Charles with a crown placed upon her head. The public response was immediate and deeply divided. Some viewers saw vulnerability. They saw a woman who had been painted with the broadest, darkest brush finally stepping out of the shadows. Others saw manipulation, a carefully constructed display of emotion timed perfectly to garner sympathy at the precise moment her reign was under fire. The royal PR machine amplified the softer response, sharing clips of her most tearful moments, framing her as the misunderstood matriarch holding a fractured family together. Yet no amount of sympathy could erase what had already taken root in the minds of the people that the Queen they had been told to accept was now clinging to that title, not defending it. Inside the palace, reactions were muted but telling. Anne reportedly watched the interview without comment. Catherine, according to sources close to her, did not watch it at all. Neither woman made any public statement, and that silence, deliberate, measured, and powerful, spoke louder than any broadcast. For them, the battle wasn't one of image. It was one of the truths, and no number of tears could alter what they knew in their hearts. Camilla's final gamble had been played. But before the dust could settle, one final revelation would shatter everything, one that didn't come from Anne or Catherine, but from inside Camilla's own family. Just when Camilla thought she'd weathered the storm when the interviews were aired, the headlines softened, and the palace appeared to return to its usual rhythm. An email surfaced that detonated everything she had fought to protect. It wasn't from a journalist. It wasn't from a royal aide or a disgruntled staff member. It was from within her own family. The betrayal came not from outside the gates but from blood. Camilla's granddaughter, long shielded from the spotlight and thought to be uninvolved in royal affairs, had quietly initiated correspondence with a tabloid editor. The content of those messages? Devastating. They weren't idle chatter or careless comments. They were plans. Cold, calculated strategies to discredit Catherine using false narrative stories intended to frame her as manipulative, unstable, and unworthy of the public's trust. When the emails were discovered by a palace IT technician during a routine server audit, alarm bells rang instantly. What began as a whisper in the back halls of Clarence House quickly grew into a blaring scandal that couldn't be silenced. The staff were stunned. Even the most seasoned members of the royal household, used to leaks and cover-ups, couldn't believe what they were reading. The messages revealed timelines, draft headlines, even direct payments discussed in code. It was not an accident. It was a campaign one crafted with chilling precision and terrifying intent. Camilla, confronted with the evidence, was said to be speechless at first. Then came the denial. She pleaded ignorance, insisting she had no knowledge of the communications, no involvement in the plan, and no reason to sabotage Catherine. But no explanation could soften the impact. It was her family's name attached to the betrayal, her bloodline, her legacy. And in the eyes of the public and increasingly within the palace, that was enough. King Charles, already frayed from weeks of turmoil, was pushed to the edge. What had once been loyalty now turned into anguish. Privately, he was reported to have wept after being shown the full email chain. He didn't yell, he didn't accuse me. He simply gave the order. Effective immediately, Camilla's family, every member tied to her by blood or marriage, would be stripped of all public roles, appearances, and royal privileges. It was a quiet decree, but it sent shockwaves through the monarchy. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was an exile, issued by the man who had once risked everything for Camilla's love. The punishment was final, and it was personal. Days later, during the annual Founders' Day celebration at the palace, Catherine and Anne stood shoulder to shoulder on the iconic balcony, the crowd below erupting into thunderous applause. Camilla was nowhere in sight. Her absence wasn't addressed. It didn't need to be. The public had made its choice. Support for Catherine surged to unprecedented levels. Social media lit up with images of her beside Anne, hailed by millions as the people's queen. For many, the monarchy had finally found its moral compass. Not in the crown worn on one's head, but in the courage carried within. As the royal family regroups, one thing is certain: the alliance between Princess Anne and Catherine didn't just shake the palace, it redrew the entire future of the monarchy. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.